He was the last U.S. president to rise directly from log cabin poverty to the Oval Office, a man forged by hunger, faith, war, and intellect. James A. Garfield, the self-made scholar who became a Civil War general and then President of the United States, lived one of the most dramatic American lives of the 19th century. His rise was meteoric. His assassination was tragic. And yet, the story the world rarely hears is the one that unfolded inside his own home. Garfield and his wife, Lucretia Garfield, raised 7 children, each shaped by a household filled with books, discipline, moral conviction, and the constant weight of public service. Their lives began in quiet Ohio fields, but they grew up in a family swept into the violent heart of American politics. Some of the Garfield children inherited their father's brilliance. Some inherited his gentleness. Some inherited the sadness left behind by his death. All of them inherited a legacy interrupted, a legacy forever marked by a single gunshot in the summer of 1881. Behind the heroic war general and the martyred president was a father who adored his children, who filled their home with warmth and education, who believed that learning was the truest path to freedom. And after his assassination, it was these 7 children who carried the Garfield name forward into a new era, each in their own way trying to complete the story their father never finished. Tonight, we dive beyond the myth of the fallen president to uncover the intimate history of James A. Garfield and the 7 children who lived in the shadow of a brilliant life cut painfully short. Number 7. Abram Garfield. Abram Garfield, born on November 20th, 1872, was the youngest of James A. Garfield's 7 children. The child who entered the world just as his father's political star was rising, and whose life would eventually become a bridge between the Garfield legacy and modern America. He was named after Garfield's own father, Abram, who died when the president was just an infant, giving the boy a symbolic weight from the moment he drew his first breath, unlike his older siblings, who remembered the warmth, humor, and intellectual brilliance of their father. Abram was only 9 years old when James A. Garfield was shot in July 1881 and died 2 months later. He grew up in the long shadow of a father he barely knew, shaped more by legacy than memory. Yet that distance became a powerful force, one that pushed him not toward politics or war, but toward creation, design, and the building of a new American world. While his brothers entered public life or carried military tradition forward, Abram took a quieter but profoundly influential path: architecture. He studied at Williams College and then at the prestigious Massachusetts Institute of Technology, where he refined a talent for structure, proportion, and aesthetics. In the early 20th century, while America raced toward industrial modernity, Abram emerged as a thoughtful, refined architect whose work blended classical sense with a forward-looking vision. Returning home to Ohio, he founded the architectural firm Mead and Garfield, later known as Garfield, Harris, Robinson, and Schaefer. Abram became one of the leading architects in Cleveland, contributing to civic buildings, libraries, banks, and elegant private homes that still stand today. His designs emphasized dignity, balance, and craftsmanship, a reflection of the values he inherited from the father history remembers as a scholar and reformer. But Abram's most meaningful work wasn't in blueprints or concrete. It was in preserving the Garfield legacy. He played an essential role in maintaining the James A. Garfield National Historic Site, ensuring that his father's story and the traumatic end of his presidency would not fade into obscurity. He served on educational boards, civic committees, and institutions dedicated to public memory and national heritage. In many ways, Abram became the guardian of the Garfield name, protecting the story his siblings had lived through but he had grown up reconstructing from fragments. As the 20th century progressed, Abram Garfield became a model of stability and professionalism, a man who chose creation over conflict, craft over politics, and legacy over spectacle. He married Helen Newell and raised 2 daughters, grounding the Garfield lineage in quiet dignity rather than public drama. Abram lived until 1958, reaching 85 years of age. Long enough to watch America evolve from the Civil War generation that shaped his father into the atomic age and beyond. He became, in the end, the longest living Garfield child and the last direct witness to the intimate family world shaped by the nation's 20th president. Among James A. Garfield's 7 children, Abram is the builder, the son who crafted beauty from loss, structure from chaos, and a lasting legacy from a life touched early by national tragedy. Number 6. Irvin Mcdowell Garfield. Irvin Mcdowell Garfield, born on August 3, 1870, entered the world during a moment of rising promise for the Garfield family. Named after General Irvin Mcdowell, one of James A. Garfield's fellow Union officers, the boy carried a legacy of military honor. Yet, his own life would follow a very different path. Irvin was thoughtful, studious, and deeply shaped by the trauma his family endured when he was just 11 years old. The assassination of his father, which tore the Garfield household into a permanent before and after. Unlike Abram, who was too young to fully recall the tragedy, Irvin remembered everything. He remembered the chaos at the Baltimore and Potomac Railroad station. He remembered the nation's grief echoing through his home. And he remembered watching his mother, Lucretia, grieve with a quiet strength that became the emotional foundation for the rest of his life. As a young man, Irvin absorbed his father's love of learning and public service, but he chose a career rooted not in politics, but in justice. He attended Williams College and then Columbia Law School, where he developed a talent for careful analysis and thoughtful interpretation. Irvin did not possess the fiery charisma of his father, nor the assertive confidence of some of his brothers. But he possessed something equally powerful, a calm, balanced intellect that made him ideal for leadership in law and administration. His career flourished. Irvin became president of numerous companies, including the Western Reserve Law and Title Company, and later the Cleveland Trust Company, helping shape the economic infrastructure of early 20th century Ohio. His sense of fairness and discipline made him a respected figure in business circles. But where Irvin left an even more lasting mark was in education. He served on the boards of several academic institutions, including Williams College, following in his father's footsteps as a champion of learning. Irvin believed, as James A. Garfield once famously said, that the best education came from a log with a student at one end and Mark Hopkins at the other. Irvin dedicated much of his adult life to ensuring that educational opportunities remained accessible, rigorous, and grounded in moral purpose. Though he never sought fame or the public spotlight, Irvin became a quiet pillar of stability for the Garfield family, a counterbalance to the turbulent losses and pressures that shaped their early lives. He married Ellen Nellie Williams and raised 2 sons, passing on a legacy of responsibility, modesty, and intellectual rigor. Irvin lived a long and steady life, passing away in 1951 at the age of 81. By then, he had become the Garfield son who carried the values of James A. Garfield not through political ambition, but through ethical leadership and the belief that justice and education were the true engines of American progress. Among the 7 Garfield children, Irvin Mcdowell Garfield is the quiet custodian, the son who transformed tragedy into duty, choosing a life of integrity over ambition, and ensuring that the principles his father lived by endured long after the gunshots of 1881 faded into history. Number 5. Harry Augustus Garfield. Harry Augustus Garfield, born on October 11, 1863, was the 3rd son of James A. Garfield, and the child who most visibly inherited his father's intellect, charisma, and gift for leadership. Unlike some of his siblings who sought quieter lives beyond the shadow of the White House, Harry stepped confidently into the public arena, becoming the Garfield child who most fully lived out the promise of the legacy his father never had time to complete. Harry was 17 when his father was assassinated, old enough to understand the cruelty of fate, old enough to feel the weight of national grief pressed directly onto his own shoulders. That defining trauma instead of crushing him, sharpened his resolve. It made him disciplined, focused, determined to turn his father's unfinished dreams into his own life's work. He attended Williams College, the institution his father loved, and later earned a degree from Columbia Law School. But Harry's path was never meant to be confined to a courtroom. He carried the charm of a statesman, the mind of a professor, and the passion of a reformer. Over time, Harry emerged as one of the most respected legal and academic figures of his generation. He began as a professor of contracts and constitutional law, where students admired his calm authority and the clarity of his mind. Then came the role that would define him, president of Williams College. Under Harry's leadership, the school modernized and expanded, emerging as one of the premier liberal arts institutions in the United States. He was known for his disciplined approach, progressive educational vision, and the quiet dignity he brought to every decision. But Harry's influence did not stop with academia. During World War I, President Woodrow Wilson appointed him Fuel Administrator of the United States, placing him in charge of the nation's vital coal supply during wartime shortages. It was a role filled with pressure, conflict, and national scrutiny. Yet Harry handled it with the same steadiness and integrity that defined his entire life. He enacted the controversial Heatless Mondays, a policy designed to conserve fuel, showing that sometimes leadership requires unpopularity for the greater good. People who knew Harry said he resembled his father not in appearance, but in presence. Calm, rational, principled. He was the statesman his father might have become had he not been cut down after just 4 months in office. In his personal life, Harry married Belle Garfield Mason and raised 2 sons. He remained deeply connected to his siblings, often serving as the unofficial patriarch of the Garfield family as the decades passed. His sense of duty, shaped by childhood tragedy, became the anchor that kept the family's values alive. Harry Augustus Garfield died in 1942, leaving behind a legacy of scholarship, leadership, and public service. The kind of legacy that would have made President Garfield proud. Among James A. Garfield's 7 children, Harry is the heir of the mind, the son who transformed intellect into influence, discipline into leadership, and a father's unfinished destiny into a life of meaningful public service. Number 4. James Rudolph Garfield. James Rudolph Garfield, born on October 17, 1865, was the Garfield child who stepped closest to the flame of national politics, the son who inherited not only James A. Garfield's intellect, but also his appetite for reform, justice, and public leadership. If Harry Garfield carried the academic legacy of their father, James Rudolph carried the political one. He became the Garfield who stood before crowds, shaped policy, and fought corruption with a moral intensity that echoed the fallen president. He was just 15 years old when his father was assassinated, old enough to feel the enormity of the moment, old enough to understand that the nation had taken something from him that could never be returned. That trauma did not weaken him. It forged him. James attended Williams College and then Columbia Law School, emerging with a sharp mind and a fiercely ethical backbone. It wasn't long before he entered public service, not quietly, but with conviction. His rise was swift. In the early 1900s, the United States was transforming into a modern industrial power. But corruption, monopolies, and political machines still dominated every corner of American life. Into that world stepped James Rudolph Garfield, a reformer cut from the same cloth as the progressive era's leading figures. President Theodore Roosevelt, a fellow crusader against corruption, saw Garfield's potential immediately. Roosevelt admired Garfield's integrity, discipline, and fearlessness, traits he believed the nation desperately needed in government. Roosevelt appointed James Rudolph Garfield to a series of increasingly powerful positions: Civil Service Commissioner fighting patronage and political corruption, Commissioner of Corporations investigating monopolies and corporate abuses, Secretary of the Interior, the role that defined him. As Secretary of the Interior, Garfield became a champion of conservation. Working alongside Roosevelt and Gifford Pinchot, he fought to protect millions of acres of natural resources from exploitation by powerful corporate interests. His work helped lay the foundation for America's modern conservation policies, national parks, protected forests, and the belief that the nation's natural heritage belonged to its people, not to private industry. But integrity often comes with a cost. When President Roosevelt left office, his successor, William Howard Taft, dismantled much of Roosevelt's conservation agenda. Garfield, fiercely loyal to Roosevelt and furious at Taft's reversal of reform, condemned the new administration publicly. This split contributed to the dramatic fracture of the Republican Party during the 1912 election, a political earthquake that reshaped American politics for decades. After leaving government, Garfield remained a respected public figure. He practiced law, advocated for environmental protection, and became a moral watchdog in an era of shifting political alliances. In his personal life, he married Helen Newell and raised 4 children, passing on the principles of service and integrity that had defined the Garfield family since the days of the Civil War. James Rudolph Garfield lived until 1950, long enough to witness wars, reforms, depressions, and transformations that his father never lived to see. Through it all, he remained steadfast, courageous, and uncompromising. Among James A. Garfield's children, James Rudolph Garfield is the reformer, the son who fought the battles his father never had the chance to fight, and who carried the Garfield name into the heart of America's most transformative political era. Number 3. Mary Molly Garfield Stanley Brown. Mary Molly Garfield, born on January 16, 1867, was the only daughter of James A. Garfield, who lived to adulthood, a bright, compassionate, and steady presence, who became the emotional anchor of the Garfield family after the assassination that shattered their world. While her brothers carried the family name into politics, law, academia, and architecture, Molly carried something far more delicate: the heart of the Garfield legacy. From the beginning, Molly was adored by her parents. James A. Garfield doted on her, writing tenderly about her curiosity, her gentleness, and her gift for bringing warmth into their bustling household of boys. She grew up surrounded by books, philosophy, and music. Her mother, Lucretia, made certain that her daughter's education matched that of her brothers in depth and discipline, something rare for girls in the 19th century. Molly was 14 when the defining tragedy of her life struck. She was old enough to witness the horror, old enough to understand the weight of it, old enough to feel its permanent mark. On July 1981, when President Garfield was shot by Charles Guiteau, Molly was thrust into a nightmare. She traveled with her mother and siblings to the New Jersey seaside, where doctors battled for months to keep her father alive. Molly watched day after day as the nation prayed and newspapers recounted every detail of the president's suffering. When he died on September 19, 1881, Molly's childhood ended instantly. In the years that followed, she became her mother's closest companion, helping Lucretia manage the family home, their public responsibilities, and the enormous task of preserving her husband's legacy. While her brothers pursued education and careers, Molly stayed by Lucretia's side, steady, loyal, and emotionally grounded. But Molly's life was not defined by tragedy alone. In 1888, she married Joseph Stanley Brown, who had served as her father's private secretary in the White House. Their marriage was deeply affectionate, built on shared purpose and mutual respect. Together, they carved out a life of quiet dignity, far from the political spotlight. The couple raised 2 children and settled into a rhythm of intellectual engagement and public service. Molly remained active in historical preservation, civic organizations, and education initiatives. Her calm presence, refined intelligence, and unwavering devotion made her a beloved figure within her community. She was also one of the central forces behind preserving the James A. Garfield National Historic Site, working alongside her siblings to ensure that her father's home and legacy would survive for future generations. where her brothers fought in government. Molly fought in memory. In the later decades of her life, she remained the matriarchal figure of the Garfield clan and the person her brothers and extended family looked to for emotional steadiness and moral grounding. She lived until 1947, passing away at age 80, having outlived most of her siblings and having witnessed a century of American change. Among James A. Garfield's 7 children, Mary Molly Garfield Stanley Brown is the heart the daughter who endured tragedy with quiet strength, preserved her family's deepest legacy, and became the emotional thread that held the Garfields together long after the president's death. Number 2. Harry Garfield, the first Harry, the child lost too soon. Before the world knew the distinguished statesman Harry Augustus Garfield, there was another Harry in the Garfield family, a small boy whose life flickered and went out long before the nation ever heard the name President Garfield. This first Harry, born on October 11, 1860, was James and Lucretia Garfield's second child, and his brief life left a mark of sorrow that lingered quietly in the family for decades. Harry was delicate from the beginning, a fragile baby in a frontier household filled with noise, work, and the rising ambitions of a father who was still shaping his early political career. Lucretia doted on him, sensing the vulnerability in his soft features and hesitant movements. James, who adored all his children with equal intensity, held a particular tenderness for this small, gentle boy who seemed to need extra protection from the world. But in the 19th century, even the most devoted parents were often powerless. Childhood illness came swiftly, without warning and without cure. In the winter of 1863, a season brutal even by Ohio standards, Harry became gravely ill. Records suggest respiratory complications, possibly diphtheria or pneumonia, diseases that were common and often fatal to young children of the era. Despite desperate efforts by the family and their doctors, Harry's condition worsened. On October 16, 1863, just 3 years old, Harry Garfield died in his parents' home. The loss was devastating. James A. Garfield, a man whose life would later be defined by courage under fire and unshakable moral resolve, wrote grief-stricken letters describing the heartbreak of losing a child so young. He confessed that the house felt cold without Harry's presence. Lucretia, who hid her emotions behind stoic faith, was shattered. The small coffin was carried out of their home quietly, with only family present, a moment that never left the memory of those who witnessed it. The death of little Harry changed the Garfield household in ways that would ripple through the decades. It made James more tender with his surviving children. It made Lucretia more fiercely protective as the family grew. And it created a private sorrow rarely spoken aloud, but always felt. Years later, when their 5th son was born in 1863, just months after Harry's passing, the Garfields chose to honor their lost child by giving the newborn a similar middle name, Harry Augustus Garfield. This was not a replacement, but a remembrance, a small attempt to keep the spirit of the first Harry alive within the family. The second Harry would go on to become a national figure, but the first Harry remained the quiet, unspoken grief in the Garfield story, the child who never lived long enough to see his father rise to the presidency or his siblings carve their own paths into American history. Among James A. Garfield's 7 children, the first Harry is the shadow the son whose short life shaped the emotional world of the Garfield family, long before the eyes of the nation ever turned toward them. Number 1. Eliza Arabella Trot Garfield. Eliza Arabella Garfield, lovingly nicknamed Trot, was James A. Garfield's firstborn child, born on December 3, 1860, into a world of promise, hardship, and hope. She arrived during the early years of Garfield's political ascent, when he was still a young congressman balancing the demands of public service with the simple struggles of frontier family life. From the beginning, Trot became the emotional center of her parents' world. She was bright-eyed, curious, and remarkably affectionate. Garfield adored her. In letters from this period, he often wrote about the comfort he found in her presence after long, exhausting days in Washington. Lucretia, deeply devoted to her children, described Trot as spirited, sensitive, and lively. The kind of little girl who could make an entire room softer simply by entering it. But her life would last only 3 short years, and her death would become the first great tragedy of the Garfield family. In the winter of 1863, as diseases swept through Ohio with merciless force, Trot fell ill. Records point to diphtheria, a deadly infection that preyed upon small children. For days, James and Lucretia remained at her bedside, fighting against the inevitable with prayers, poultices, and a desperation known only to parents who see life slipping out of their arms. Despite all efforts, Eliza Arabella Garfield died on December 3, 1863, her 3rd birthday. The grief was unbearable. James A. Garfield, a man who would one day hold steady on Civil War battlefields and speak with unwavering conviction from Congress and the White House, was crushed. He wrote in his diary, "The light of our home has gone out." Lucretia, stoic, strong, and deeply rooted in faith, broke under the weight of losing her firstborn. The quiet sorrow of that winter never fully left her, and the absence of little Trot lingered in every corner of their home. Her death had a profound and lasting impact on the entire Garfield family. It softened Garfield's already compassionate heart. It deepened Lucretia's fierce devotion to their surviving children, and it created a silent, permanent thread of grief woven through the family's story. Trot became a symbol of innocence and the fragility of life in an era when even the most devoted parents were powerless before disease. Her memory remained alive in the Garfield household long after her passing, in photos, in letters, and in the tender way the family spoke about her. Among James A. Garfield's 7 children, Eliza Arabella Trot Garfield is the first light. The child who brought early joy into a rising family, and whose loss etched the first enduring sorrow into the heart of a man destined to lead a nation. The story of James A. Garfield and his 7 children is not simply the tale of a presidential family. It is the story of America's most fragile truths: that greatness can rise from poverty, that hope can survive war, and that even the most brilliant lives can be undone by tragedy. Garfield's presidency lasted only 200 days, but his legacy lived on through the children who carried both his brilliance and his burdens. Eliza Arabella Trot Garfield, the firstborn, brought early joy into the Garfield home before her death at age 3. A loss that carved the first deep wound into the family's heart. Harry Garfield, the first Harry, died just months later, leaving behind a grief that never fully healed. Molly Garfield, the only daughter to live to adulthood, became the emotional spine of the family. Steady, loyal, and resilient in the face of unbearable loss. James Rudolph Garfield, the reformer, carried his father's political ideals into the progressive era, fighting corruption and protecting the nation's natural resources with Rooseveltian intensity. Harry Augustus Garfield, the second Harry, fulfilled the intellectual legacy of his father through academia, eventually becoming president of Williams College and a national leader during World War I. Irvin Mcdowell Garfield, quiet and principled, brought justice and stability into the world of business and education. Abram Garfield, the youngest, became the builder, a distinguished architect who preserved the physical memory of the Garfield family and lived long enough to witness a century of American transformation. Together, these children represent the full spectrum of human experience: love and loss, duty and ambition, fragility and endurance. Their lives reflect not only the legacy of a fallen president, but the resilience of a family bound by tragedy and purpose. They preserve the Garfield name through scholarship, reform, creativity, integrity, and service, each adding a chapter to a story their father never had the chance to finish. James A. Garfield's life ended too soon, but the echo of his ideals lived on through 7 children who carried his values forward into classrooms and courtrooms, into government and architecture, into family memory and national history. The Garfield legacy is not carved in the length of a presidency, but in the lives shaped by it. A legacy born in a log cabin, tested by war, shattered by assassination, and held together by a family that refused to let the light go out. A legacy woven from brilliance, heartbreak, and the quiet determination to turn tragedy into meaning.